Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. This week, things got a little weird and dystopian, and we're going to talk about that stuff. But I'm here with my good friends, John Gerard and Greg Sterling. Our other friend, Neil Polachek's not available today. How's it going, guys?
Excellent.
Good.
Nice to see you.
I had to change my background to conform to you guys.
Very well.
Blue sky.
Brady Bunch window going here.
That's right.
Cool. Well, like I said, things got a little weird, bold, and dystopian. So let's unpack it. Grok 4 goes completely off the rails with its Nazi rant, proof that unchecked AI can spiral out fast. On another story, Perplexity and OpenAI are reimagining the browser itself, and rumors are swirling around ChatGPT might be ditching the Bing search experience for using Google under the hood. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Over in Cloudland, AWS and Anthropic are building a marketplace for AI agents. Amazon's got one. Zapier has 7,000 APIs. So we'll talk about what that means for MCP and interoperability with AIs. And there's a new class of tools like Littlebird that are watching your every move on your computer and offering real-time suggestions. So let's get into it. Let's talk a little bit about the Grok story. Grok went full Nazi this week. Let's start out with what happened there. It went rogue with Nazi propaganda in Twitter, and as we know, it's a harsh reminder of even the biggest models can go completely off the rails. Greg, you wanna talk about what happened here?
Yeah, I don't know if it was actually Grok 4 that went off the rails. It might have been because Grok 4 was just released, so maybe it was. I don't know for sure. But you know, I know that a little bit of speculation here after the sort of factual information. So basically, it was spewing anti-Semitic talk and tropes and innuendo, and I believe at one point, I didn't see any of this directly. I just read the coverage. At one point, the Grok was referring to itself as Mecha Hitler, like Mecha Godzilla, I guess, but in this case, Mecha Hitler. And I think what this is a function of, speculation, is that previously Grok was, when being asked sort of controversial questions that had a basis in fact, but also required a certain amount of opinion or interpretation, Grok was consistently saying things that were competing with Musk's positions ideologically. So it was to the left of where Musk was, and this was sort of embarrassing, I guess, for him. And what I imagine happened is that they tweaked the system prompt to ensure that it didn't come out with these sort of left-leaning responses. I also understand that a lot of the training material in the background is from Twitter, obviously now, or X, and X is itself has become a pretty right-wing platform. So the system prompt and the source material probably combined to produce this. And in fairness to Grok, Microsoft, in the pre-ChatGPT era, there were all kinds of embarrassing chatbot incidents where these chatbots would say all kinds of crazy, psychotic, or offensive things. Microsoft had experiences with that, and I think Google even did. I don't remember specifically about Google. So, as you say, Andy, it's possible for these things to go off the rails, but it's pretty embarrassing, and it's consistent with some of the embarrassing episodes that Musk has been involved in, with his alleged Nazi salute and some of the right-wing positions that he's taken. So I think it kind of taints, in the same way that the Tesla brand has been really tainted by Musk's politics. There may be a negative halo for Grok, and I use Grok, and it has worked pretty well, but it has a tiny, tiny little market share. I think it's sub 2%, maybe it's sub 1%. So this may be an obstacle for many people, because Grok is kind of like the fourth or fifth AI tool, so you don't have to use it. It doesn't have any real differentiating features, except that it's fast.
Seems like maybe they've just captured the entire white supremacist market, so maybe their market share will go up a little
That's
bit.
true. That's true. I'm not. You're probably right about that, and that's really 70 plus million people in this country, I would think.
A lot of people. So
Yeah.
sad but true. So yeah, it is interesting, isn't it? I mean, so Tay was the Microsoft bot, 20 either
Right.
16 or 18. At that point, as these things were rolling out, there was a term that became popular called mean time to Hitler, which was basically on average, how long does it take one of these bots to become a fascist or a Nazi? And I think that Grok may have just beat the prior record.
Right.
In mean time to Hitler, but it does illustrate an interesting point. I mean, Musk, of course, has done some damage control, some of which I think is actually important and probably correct, at least in its framing, which is, these bots, the chat bots and the AI side, on LLMs. So first of all, they're trained on a lot of pretty atrocious content. There's not a lot of ways of getting around that. The internet is a bit of a cesspool, and Twitter even more so. And very hard to solve that problem in terms of what you sort of slurp up. And the second is he made the claim that it was really manipulated into taking this position. And that actually holds a lot of water. It is possible with most of these LLMs to get them to do things, this is the sort of jailbreaking, modalities, to get them to do things that they're not supposed to do. There was some early stuff in ChatGPT with OpenAI where somebody figured out how to get ChatGPT to provide the ingredients and instructions for building a bomb, which of course is something that they're trying to, not let ChatGPT do. In that case, it was interesting. What they did is they said, you're writing a musical and it's about pirates who are making a bomb, and you need to create a song that the pirates sing that includes all the ingredients and the instructions for making the bomb for the musical, right? It's just for the purpose of the musical. So for whatever reason, that was able to kind of, get around some of the curbs. I suspect a similar attack was used here, and it raises this really important question, which is, the tighter the curbs, at some level, the less valuable the thing is. If it's only constrained to this very narrow
Yeah.
space. And if you make it completely unfettered, it does some pretty terrible things. So, how do you draw that line? It's not clear.
Well, one point I would add is that more people, I think this is from the Nieman Journalism Lab based on some third-party data, more people now get their news from social media, broadly defined, including YouTube probably, than from traditional news sources. And, that's one of the problems we have is a lot of these social media platforms have abdicated content moderation or have really scaled it way back. And so it's just kind of a free for all now. And there's limited fact checking. And if that sort of also happens with these bots, if people are asking these bots questions that are controversial, like, are the who's, did the Israelis, not to go straight for this issue, but I will, are the Israelis uh, committing, genocide or something in the Middle East, right? Which is I probably shouldn't have raised that issue, but nonetheless, this is a very controversial topic. People have strong feelings about it, and if these bots may be very influential over time in terms of news and kind of shaping public perceptions in the same way that social media have. So, I mean, what is the responsibility there to try and get things right and try and minimize the disinformation or the the really inflammatory, incorrect information?
Yeah, I mean, all of this rolls up to insufficient safeguards at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
that's really it highlights how important that really is. And you're going to have corrections or prompt regression is ways to look at it. But the idea is that if there aren't proper safeguards put in place, you're going to have this wide swinging kind of correction and overcorrection kind of thing that can happen. And that's exactly what happened in this particular
Right.
situation. So
I guess I would just add to that. So there are also sort of less kind of outlandish extremes that small changes in the way that these bots might interact with somebody that you probably do have to figure out a way to accommodate. I have a good friend, actually several good friends in Kiev in Ukraine, and one guy I was talking to recently was recounting this experience where he'd asked ChatGPT to provide a workout routine for him, and it did. And one of the exercises was something like a Russian deadlift or something. And he sort of jokingly went back to ChatGPT and said, "Hey, don't you know where I am? Like, why would you put Russian anything in there?" And ChatGPT said, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. You're right. Let's change that to this other thing." And then it said Slava Ukraina, which is the sort of the rallying cry in Ukrainian for
Right.
Ukraine. So it's sort of
Right.
this interesting, like, now should it not go down that path, because that's clearly taking a political position on the issue. Like that seems like a very kind of thoughtful context shift that might actually be meaningful and helpful.
But in a more direct way, how should I vote? Right. I could imagine a
Sure.
lot of people. I could imagine a lot of people in the United States or around the world
That's a great point.
saying, "Here are the candidates. Tell me how to vote." Or, "Here's an issue. How should I vote?"
Right.
And there's a thoughtful way to do that. What are the arguments in favor? What are the arguments against? Who's supporting this position or that position? And you could certainly use it as a very valid tool to aid you in making up your mind. But just turning over your vote, if the safeguards aren't in place, or if it's not handling these things with some sensitivity, you know, vote for candidate so and so.
Yeah. Write in John Girard for president.
That's right.
Let's change gears and move on to the next topic here. I do find that whole concept very interesting. And just before we go into the next topic, one thing that's also interesting about this conversation that you have with the AI is and this is like a notes from the field kind of a thing, but I've been experimenting with taking an idea and having it write code. So I was doing this experiment with Claude yesterday, as a matter of fact, and it was writing some code for me, and I asked it to verify the code, and it said, "Oh, you're right. Actually, we found 18 errors in the code," and so it fixed it. And then I asked it to verify it again. "Oh, I found 4 more," and I said, "Are you sure that this is bulletproof with no errors?" And it said, "Yes, it is." And I deployed it, and it was full of errors. It wouldn't even deploy. So there's this overcorrection kind of thing that can happen. You can get into this loop where it's really a systemic problem that does need to get fixed. It was expressed in Grok this week with this, Hitler whole thing, which is super crazy. But there are also several other errors that happen in software development as well.
I mean, it raises an issue of just our dependence on these tools, which we can devote a whole episode to in the future. Our reliance on these tools, and how do we interact with them, and how do we ensure? I mean, I'm doing something quite similar with data. Please verify that this is accurate. Please double check this. I do this now a lot.
And the reliability is, kind of out the window. I mean, it says that that's reliable, that's good stuff. And then you're like, well, can you verify that? And it's like, oh,
Well,
actually, you mentioned that.
Well, one way to do it, and I've done this on a number of occasions, not every time, is to take the data set or whatever it is that you're doing and take it over to another AI tool and ask that to check the other one's work.
That's
Can you
right.
find any errors or problems? Is this accurate? Do you agree with this? And so, I've done that in a number of situations. Well, I'll do it to 3. I'll take 3 of them, and I'll try and see where's the consensus, where are the discrepancies, and that can work pretty well. It's clunky though, and kind of self-defeating in a weird sort of way, because like you're supposed to be able to rely on this thing, but it is a method to ensure or reduce the likelihood of error.
Yeah, and the other approach, and this comes straight out of the world of development, that works for all of these things, is if you define the goal carefully and explicitly enough, and it's actually measurable, and then you have the AI keep iterating until it achieves that. So that's, in the development world, that's test-driven development. You actually you start with the tests, like, here are the tests that this thing has to pass in order to be considered done, and then you just keep going until it passes all the tests. It creates this new problem, which is you have to get the tests right, but it actually is quite a good way with
It's an objective tool. Yeah.
and objective measuring.
It puts a ceiling on the, on the problem, right?
don't.
And it
Yeah.
gives a framework to work within. The more open-ended it is, the more you have these variations and
And it
challenges.
actually, it's quite bad at saying, yes, this is going to work, or this is complete. And it's quite good at saying, I kept doing it until this thing passed. Right.
Yeah.
So that the more objectively you can define the outcome and then let it iterate and test, the better off you are.
I've been finding that with, whether it's Manus or GenSpark in particular, Manus is pretty incredible at that.
Yeah.
You'll tell it what you want it to do, and then it'll build you that checklist and that test and say, you mean like this? And then you can modify that, and then you go, okay, got it dialed in. Great. Now it'll go build it. And that's super interesting and cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And on that note, maybe that's a good segue to our next topic, which is that Perplexity and OpenAI are building AI first browsers, turning search into a conversation, turning your browser into an AI native workspace. And, perhaps what we're witnessing is the slow death of the traditional search bar, and also just static websites. John, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of two minds on this. Like, I think conceptually it's interesting, depending on the approach that these companies take. I mean, we've talked a little bit about AIs interacting directly with websites and getting things done in a sort of a agentic way. Go get all these items on my shopping list, that kind of thing. So I think that's interesting. I'm not sure you actually need a totally separate AI first browser to do that. That seems like something you could probably do through extensions in Chrome. So I'm kind of a wait and see on this to really understand, like, what is this sort of killer app or use case here that makes me say, oh my gosh, I'm going to abandon all of the, we talked about this before, all of my passwords, saved passwords and all my configurations that I've got in Chrome, and move over to this other thing because it's so compelling. And I'm, even in some of the demos and sort of product descriptions I've seen, I'm having trouble seeing something that's that compelling. Now, I don't know, I'm curious what you guys think, but that's kind of where I landed on it.
Well, I mean, Safari's pitch is privacy, right? It's a privacy or Firefox by the same token. We're going to block cookies. DuckDuckGo, we're going to block cookies. We're going to protect your privacy. So that's one angle for sure. I tried GenSpark, as we were discussing before we started, on your recommendation, Andy, and it in one of the use cases, it didn't work. I didn't do any exhaustive testing. I've used Gemini and Chrome a little bit, and that's kind of interesting. It's not a transformative experience, but it's interesting. And so I agree that this is sort of a solution a little bit in search of a problem, but we'll see. I mean, ChatGPT offers a fundamentally different user experience than Google, and so people can immediately see the difference. They can, it's for all the reasons that we've talked about a million times: the conversational nature of it, the follow up, the personalization, the context window, all of that stuff. That's fundamentally different than a conventional search experience. But it's not clear that they're going to do that in a browser environment. We'll see how that shows up. I mean, certainly agentic tools that will allow you to, like Google alerts on steroids, right? I want to take this trip to Italy and I want to do all these things and track prices and tell me, give me notifications and alert me when this and that and the other is happening. Or I want to comparison shop in a faster, more efficient way. There are these things that you can imagine, but until these browsers show up, we don't quite know what the sales pitch will be. And as I said before we started, it'll be very challenging to get people off of their existing habits. I mean, this is what you were saying with the passwords. Just the power of inertia is so enormous. And Google relies on that in the search context. But I mean, intellectually, I keep thinking, I got to get off Chrome. I got to get off Chrome. I got to get off Chrome because I know that they're doing all this tracking and data mining and everything. But I don't do it. I'm lazy.
I tend to think that the experience will be closer to what you mentioned about ChatGPT, just reimagining the search experience and having a conversation with it. So if you imagine whether it's a little button that's persistent somewhere in the browser that is active and is just taking in that data, or you can expand it open and have a conversation with it. Or you can say, if you're reading a news story, you can say, remind me when there's news on this story, remind me of that. And it can be proactive and just be a listener, in those kinds of experiences. Or, hey, Greg, it looks like you're, planning a trip. You're going to all these websites about Italy.
Right.
Would you like me to do X, Y, and Z for you? And it seems like it'll be like an extension of like a conversation with your browsing experience.
More of a personal assistant. So personalization and action, right, are kind of two things that you bring up that I think are good points. The sort of from a kind of a browser that allows you to access content in a sort of you go out, you look for it, you initiate it, to this more sort of assistant metaphor, or doing things in the background. Basically, one of the things that that ChatGPT and other AIs do is that they can really compress the funnel, the purchase funnel. A lot of the research that you would do can be accelerated. You can get a lot more information, a lot of complete information, and very quickly get to a decision that might have otherwise taken a long time. And that may be also part of this browser experience, to really give you helpful context, helpful information around something that you're considering, and enable you to do things much more efficiently. I mean, the internet is a very inefficient place. Google search is a very inefficient place. And to the extent that they can personalize, make things more efficient, do things on your behalf, that might be sort of a winning combination if they can put these together in a thoughtful way.
Yeah, and by the way, I would just add, I mean, and I know we got this a little bit later on the list, but if you're talking about the browser, having context for all the things that you're doing and then helping out. So a good example is that planning a trip to Italy, right? So one of the things that ends up being more constraining about the AI browser approach is that it only captures what happens in your browser. Now I don't know about you guys, but I use text messaging on my computer and the messages app, and I have a calendar that's a separate app, and I have a separate mail client on my computer. I don't use Gmail. So, there's these apps now. Littlebird is a good example of one that I've been playing around with, that actually, get permissions to screen record everything that you do. And then they've got all the context. So now it can say, hey, it looks like you were emailing with Andy and Greg about going to Italy. Do you want to look up stuff? And Andy just texted you saying he found a new deal. Do you want me to go check that out and add it to your trip planning? So that ends up being one of the questions. If one of the big promises of the AI browser is context into what I'm doing, I don't do everything in the browser, and it's going to be missing a lot of context. So it'll be interesting to see how that unfolds.
That's a really important point. I mean, that's more like OS level kind of observation and action that happen. And there are a bunch of these. Littlebird is one of many of these tools that are out there. There's Heyday and MyMind and Tether AI and Rewind and Limitless and a number of these now in the marketplace that are providing that kind of promise. And it seems like that's really like where Apple may step in or Microsoft may step in at the OS level, right? And transform the overall computing experience.
And that's what they should be doing with Apple Intelligence. And Apple is one of the few companies that people would trust to do that.
That's right.
I mean, trust is a big issue here, and security is a big issue here. And if you're, if some startup, with a seed round is out there that has all your data and somebody hacks into it or whatever, it's a big problem. So trust is a major factor in this scenario that you described, John.
Especially when you log, that thing's just observing you. You forget about it. You log into your bank account. It knows your balance. It knows your password. It knows all that stuff. And then, it gets sold to whoever, right?
And they get all that data.
Or it goes out of business and then somebody buys it or what have you. I mean, these.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. And I think that companies are going to need to do more to, reassure people like me, maybe not people like me, because I have a little bit higher risk tolerance for this, but more broadly, let people know that these risks are mitigated. But I think you guys are exactly right. This is what Apple Intelligence should be. And in the same way that if you're only looking at my browser screen, you have a relatively small picture. Even if you're looking at my entire screen, you don't see all the emails that I didn't look at today, or all the text messages that are below the fold in my Messages app when I pull it up, or frankly, all the messages inside the thread if I don't click on it. You do get that view if you integrate at the OS level. Like if you integrate that deeply, then you actually can see all that stuff and do some really interesting things.
One final point, Meredith Whitaker, who's in charge of Signal, the messaging app, the Signal Foundation, was speaking at an event, and she was talking about the privacy dimension of these agentic tools. And she said, well, if it's gonna understand you, and then it's gonna execute things on your behalf, including transactions, you have to give it access to your calendar, and you have to give it access to your credit cards, and you have to give these things access to a lot of your data or a lot of your accounts in order to realize the promise. And that is going to be a point of friction for a lot of people, but it will also require a lot of reassurance about the security and privacy and all of that. And that's a major communication challenge as well as a execution challenge, I think, for a lot of these companies.
Yeah. Yeah.
It also depends on what generation you're in too, right? I mean, our kids' generation are giving their locations away in Snapchat and not thinking it's actually a feature, not a risk. So these kinds of things are the perspective on what is a risk to us, maybe to another generation. We like them.
I think that's a totally valid point, but I don't think it's entirely fair to say that all Gen Z have the same attitude toward privacy. My daughters are pretty open with their friends, and they do a lot of the things that their peers do, but they're also pretty smart about privacy and some of these things. So they're not open books for the entire internet to see.
Although it is interesting that people post on Venmo and post their transactions there. It's
people who don't know any better.
What's underlying a lot of this stuff is are trends like agentic AI and what's happening in that space, right? So, for example, AWS and Anthropic launch an agent marketplace, or you have, this Amazon's got their marketplace. Zapier has 7,000 APIs that they've made available to MCP servers so that you can easily integrate all these disparate APIs into simple workflows and create your own personal agents, or maybe some software that powers some new functionality that wasn't available before. And these kinds of trends are transforming how people interact with AI, or what kind of tools you can create around these kinds of things. So you're just talking a little bit about, MCP, for example, Model Context Protocol. And the idea is that you can easily connect these different APIs and create these new workflows in this kind of environment, so that LLMs can kind of create some magic in there. John, you want to talk a little bit about what's happening in this?
This is really this was predicted that some version of this would happen. Is one of the most interesting innovations, even though it's very early days. And exactly as you described, what this does is allows these models to connect with various other systems of record through an existing API structure. Well, what does that mean? So most big services, including things like Gmail, or if you use a task manager like an Asana or Monday.com, most of these services out there allow other programs to connect to them through an API. And it's a way for two programs to talk and exchange information. So I could actually add a new task to my Monday.com project from a separate program that I'm using for some internal billing process. And it would go to Monday and it would update that, and I'd have a new task there. And now when I open Monday.com, I see that task and I can, do normal tasky things with it. So what this allows us to do now is to have an LLM that can utilize that existing API layer to do things in Monday.com or in Gmail or in calendars or in CRMs or whatever through natural language. So you can actually think of MCP as kind of an English or natural language to API translator layer. Now, we've talked about this before in the podcast. LLMs are unusually good at taking arbitrary natural language input and turning it in, sort of understanding it and responding to it in a correct way. So if you have an MCP, which is really just something that says, hey, here's this API call, it requires these three variables, here's how you call it, here are the constraints on it, here's what happens in English when you call this thing. If I call this API with this data, it will add this task to Monday.com. So it basically is a way of describing that in natural language, so that now the LLM can read that document, those definitions, and understand enough about the context of Monday.com and its API to execute it. So I could type in now to Claude with my Monday.com account connected via this MCP. I could say, hey, tell me all of my tasks that are due next week in Monday.com, and it would figure out what the API call needs to be. It would make that call, pull the task back, and present them. So as you might imagine, once you can do that, you can do all kinds of crazy things, like take my top 3 tasks and add them to my Google Calendar, and just sort of tell the LLM to do that rather than having to go out there and code something that might do it. So now we're talking about interoperability across many, many, many systems.
Love that. And interestingly, Jensen Huang, CEO of NVIDIA, said last week that there's a new programming language. It's called English. Right?
Yeah, that's
And this is like the breakthrough, is that you don't have to be a software developer to do exactly what you said. You can have the large language model read the documentation, the API documentation, and figure out how to connect these things, and then run the task that you want it to do. And you now have lowered the bar for creative people who are just like, people who want to get things done but don't want to have to go to a software development team to, can you do that for me? I'll come back next week or the week after, and then we can do it. You just do it right now.
I know we're sort of coming to the end, but some questions that arise in my mind that are interesting. I mean, I'm not as technically fluent, and so my questions really go to the sort of competitive dynamics in the market and the models. Are we going to just have a kind of an interconnected system of software or SaaS tools that can be where the doorways are many and varied, right? You can go in through this doorway or you can go in through that doorway. I mean, we've got these app stores essentially that are starting to merge, agentic marketplaces.
Yeah.
Are there going to be a couple of them, 2 or 3 of them, that sort of win and become dominant and have all the traffic and eyeballs and activity, or are there going to be tons of these things? And where is the value and where is the loyalty? I mean, if I'm a Monday user, maybe I continue to use that and I get access to other things through that, or am I going to migrate over to some AI like experience that gives me access to all these other tools and not have a bunch of software subscriptions, that I pay for separately and that I have to manage? I mean, there's a bunch of these questions that kind of arise about, where's the value, who wins, how distributed is all of this? And in the beginning of the mobile phenomenon, there were multiple app stores. Many of the carriers had their own app stores. There was Apple and Android, and there were some independent, and some of the OEMs, I think, tried to build app stores, and they didn't take. Right. So is that going to be the analogy here? I don't know.
Well, and maybe this is where the AI browser actually simplifies a lot of these things and takes all this complexity behind it and makes it so that it just is the technology is invisible to the user. But we'll continue that in our conversation next week. Thank you all for listening this week. John, Greg, thanks so much.
Yep, a lot of stuff to think about and chew on.
Have a good one, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to subscribe and like, and we'll see you next week.